She stood alone near the marble pillars, a champagne flute delicately balanced in her hand, her silver gown shimmering under the golden lights of the ballroom. Her posture was regal, her silence unshakable, and yet not a single person from the bride's side approached her. Across the room, a cluster of well-dressed guests leaned in toward each other, giggling behind raised glasses. Their eyes flicked to her, then quickly away, like she was something to be pitied, or worse, ignored. "She doesn't belong here," one of them whispered, not realizing how loudly the words floated through the air. They didn't ask her name. They didn't know her story. They only saw what they wanted to see. But in less than an hour, their smug smiles would vanish. Because the woman they dismissed with a glance, "She's the reason the groom is standing here today. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen someone underestimated, stay with us. This story is for you." Miriam Carter entered the grand ballroom with the quiet grace of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Her pearl-gray gown hugged her figure with elegance, every fold perfectly pressed, every accessory intentionally understated. Around her neck hung a string of pearls, real ones, handed down from her own mother. A small reminder that legacy often moves in silence. At 68, Miriam had lived through eras that tested her patience and sharpened her dignity. A retired university professor and civil rights historian, she carried decades of knowledge behind her calm expression. But today, she wasn't here as a scholar. She was here as a grandmother, the only family that had ever truly mattered to her. Her grandson, Ethan, the boy she had raised after tragedy took his parents, was getting married, and she had come to celebrate. The venue was a cathedral of opulence. Tall golden columns, walls draped in cream silk, chandeliers that glittered like frozen fireworks. The bride's family spared no expense, and yet for all their wealth, there was something hollow in the way they welcomed her. Smiles stretched thin across painted faces. Eyes slid over her too quickly or lingered too long. The bride's mother, clad in icy blue satin, offered only the edge of her hand when introduced, her tone clipped and overly formal. "Thank you for coming," she said without meeting Miriam's gaze. A few guests near the reception line whispered, their eyes flicking from Miriam to each other like she was a guest of mystery or mistake. She was guided, not to the front family table, but to a seat near the edge of the room, beside a couple of distant cousins and an empty chair no one bothered to fill. From her vantage point, she could see everything: the glittering dance floor, the laughing bridal party, the speeches full of praise for the bride's family lineage and social status, but not once did anyone mention the boy Miriam had raised, protected and loved into the man standing at the altar. Not once did they speak of the woman who made sure Ethan never missed a meal, a recital, or a dream. Miriam said nothing. She had endured worse. She had stood taller in rooms filled with louder ignorance. But this felt different. This wasn't just exclusion, it was betrayal wrapped in pearls. And though she didn't show it, something heavy settled behind her eyes as she watched the celebration unfold, knowing they had no idea who they were dismissing. Not yet. Miriam sat quietly at the edge of the ballroom, her back straight, her hands resting gently on her lap as the celebration moved around her like a current she had not been invited to join. The music swelled, the laughter echoed, and the chandeliers sparkled like the night sky had cracked open above them. But beneath the glamour, something colder pulsed, something unseen but unmistakably felt. She overheard them before she saw their faces. A group of bridesmaids had clustered a few feet behind her, their champagne flutes clinking as they exchanged giggles over something too cruel to be light-hearted. "That dress," one of them said with a smirk, "looks like something the staff wears." Another leaned in and whispered, not low enough, "Seriously, who invited the help?" Miriam didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Her silence was deliberate, her composure precise. She had been in enough rooms like this, rooms dressed in wealth but emptied of warmth, to know when she was being measured and found inconvenient. Their laughter was brittle, like glass that hadn't realized it was already cracked. She exhaled quietly and rose from her chair, smoothing her skirt. The small, hand-wrapped gift she had brought for the couple, a delicate heirloom locket tucked in silver paper, was nestled in her palm. She approached the gift table with the same quiet dignity she'd carried into the ballroom, only to be stopped just before she arrived. A young man in a pressed tuxedo stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, forcing a smile. "Gifts go through the family. That area is for close relatives only." Miriam looked at him, her expression calm, unreadable. "Of course," she replied softly, her voice composed, dignified. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply turned away and began walking back toward her table. As she did, her eyes caught the gaze of the bride's father. He was watching. His glass was half full, his expression half blank. He said nothing, just turned slowly back toward his drink. The ballroom gleamed in every direction, all crystal and champagne and curated perfection. But not a single soul in that space seemed to shine with decency. The beauty was surface deep, and beneath it, the room was hollow. Symbolism dripped from every surface, the towering cake no one had touched, the flowers arranged by people who didn't know the couple, the speeches about legacy that somehow never mentioned love. Ethan, the groom, was swept up in a flurry of conversations and camera flashes. He laughed with old friends, raised toasts with in-laws, and glanced occasionally toward his grandmother, but didn't yet notice the subtle, sharp patterns of exclusion building around her like invisible walls. He hadn't heard the whispers. He hadn't seen the flinch in Miriam's fingers when she was redirected. He didn't know that the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him was being quietly erased from the day meant to honor the family she helped build. Miriam sat, once again at the edge of the ballroom, her gift now resting gently in her lap. She had not come for validation, but she had not expected erasure, and though she showed no anger, no wounded pride, the truth shimmered beneath her stillness like tension before a storm. They didn't know her, but they would. The camera flashes lit up the ballroom in bursts, illuminating smiles and staged affection as the bride's family posed for photos against the ornate backdrop of the staircase. Photographers called out names, arranged siblings, in-laws, distant cousins. Ethan stood near the edge of the group, arms loosely at his sides, waiting for someone to say her name. But no one did. "Let's keep it tight, just the bride's side for now," someone said, waving him forward while quietly nudging others away. He smiled out of habit, then glanced around. Where was Miriam? She had been there earlier, sitting quietly, watching, always watching. Now, her chair was empty. A knot formed in Ethan's stomach. He excused himself and moved toward the side hallway, scanning the crowd. Still nothing. Finally, he stopped a passing server. "Have you seen my grandmother?" he asked. The server hesitated. "Oh, yes, sir. I think she was asked to step out. They wanted the family portraits to match the theme. Something about keeping the formal aesthetics intact." Ethan blinked. "What?" she was asked. "To sit in the corner near the coat check," the server added quietly, eyes lowering. The knot in Ethan's stomach twisted into something hotter, heavier. Without a word, he turned on his heel, strode straight to the DJ booth, and pulled the mic from its stand. The music stuttered to a stop. Laughter faded. Glasses lowered. Heads turned. He cleared his throat once and looked out at the sea of polished faces. "Good evening," he said, his voice even but sharp at the edges. "I won't take long. I just need to correct something." The room tensed. "You all know I just married the love of my life. You've toasted her, complimented the cake, and praised the chandeliers," he continued. "But what you haven't done is acknowledge the woman who made this night, this life, even possible." He paused, letting the silence settle. "I was raised by a woman who sat quietly at the edge of this room all night while you whispered about her dress and redirected her gift and excluded her from photographs to preserve your aesthetic." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. "My grandmother, Miriam Carter, raised me after my parents died. She paid for my tuition. She paid for my therapy. She paid the down payment on this very venue. She made sure I had a suit for every internship interview. She edited my essays. She believed in me when no one else did." He looked toward the far corner, where Miriam now stood in the doorway, framed by shadow and soft candlelight. Still composed. Still silent. Her eyes met his, steady as ever. "And in case you didn't know," Ethan said, scanning the room, "she also owns the publishing rights to the bride's father's last business book. So if you've ever read Leadership Through Legacy, you should thank her." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eyes shifted, mouths parted. A few people turned, wide-eyed, toward Miriam, who hadn't moved a muscle, not even to react. Ethan took a breath, then finished. "If you don't see her as family, you don't see me either." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was heavy. The bride's hand trembled as she lowered her champagne glass. Her face had gone pale, and in her eyes bloomed the dawning realization that her family, in trying to perfect an image, had tainted something real. Miriam remained still at the back of the hall, regal even in shadow, the embodiment of grace unbothered by spectacle. She hadn't raised her voice, but her presence now filled the room. Ethan's words hung like truth carved in stone, and suddenly the shimmering ballroom felt less like a celebration and more like a reckoning. The room was still reeling from Ethan's words when a quiet sound interrupted the silence. The soft tap of heels on polished marble. All eyes turned as Miriam stepped forward, her pearl-gray gown brushing the floor with every graceful step. She didn't hurry. She didn't falter. She walked with the same composure she had carried her entire life, the kind built from decades, of walking into rooms where she was never expected, never fully welcomed, but always undeniably present. In her mind, a memory flickered. Young Ethan, barely 10, sitting at a kitchen table too small for dreams as big as his. She had been helping him tie his bow tie for a school recital. His hands kept fumbling. He was frustrated, but she was patient. "Slow down," she'd whispered, guiding his fingers. "You don't have to rush to look like you belong. You already do." She never taught him to chase approval. She taught him to stand with dignity, to choose principle over peacekeeping. She had never needed him to be loud, but she had prayed he'd never be silent. Now, standing in the glow of her grandsons, Bravery. She felt something settle in her chest. Not vindication. Something deeper. Something like peace. She turned to face Ethan, her voice soft but deliberate. "I didn't raise him to choose silence," she said. "So I thank you, Ethan, for using your voice." Then she turned to the bride, who stood frozen, hands trembling at her sides. From her handbag, Miriam drew a folded envelope, sealed with gold wax. She handed it over without fanfare. "This," Miriam said gently, "is a confirmation letter for a grant. $250,000 to help fund the nonprofit you and Ethan dreamt of starting. I've had it ready for weeks." Gasps. Rippled again, this time tinged with disbelief and shame. "It was never about money," Miriam continued, her voice steady. "It was about whether I would be safe among my grandson's future, whether the world he was marrying into had room for the people who helped build him." The bride opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Her mouth parted as she read the letter, and the tears came quickly, slipping down her cheeks before she could hold them back. She looked up, eyes wide with remorse. I didn't know. I didn't see what was happening," she said. Miriam nodded slowly. "I believe you." The bride's mother stepped forward, face tight with a manufactured smile. "Miss Carter, I hope you'll accept our apologies for the misunderstanding." Miriam met her gaze. "I accept it," she replied. Her tone was calm, unshaken, but there was no warmth in it. No invitation. Just grace. Then she turned back to Ethan and gently took his hand. The ballroom remained silent, not because they were told to be quiet, but because they finally understood the weight of everything they had ignored. Miriam hadn't come to impress them. She had come to witness the union of the boy she raised, and in doing so she had reminded the entire room that respect isn't owed to appearances. It's owed to those who gave us the strength to stand. Miriam didn't leave. She could have. No one would have blamed her if she had gathered her things and walked out of that ballroom with her dignity intact and her head held high. But she didn't. She stayed. She returned to her seat at the edge of the room, not because she had been placed there, but because she chose it now. Her presence, once overlooked, had become undeniable. And slowly, something began to shift. The silence that had once coated the room in quiet judgment now gave way to something softer, something learning. One of the bridesmaids, the same one, who had laughed earlier, walked over quietly and asked if she could sit beside her. Then another followed. No apologies were offered aloud, but Miriam felt the shift. Not in words, but in posture, in eyes that no longer looked through her but truly at her. When the music resumed and Ethan took the floor for his dance with the bride, he didn't begin with his wife. He walked straight to Miriam and extended his hand. She looked at him, surprised, then smiled gently and stood. Their dance was simple, quiet and slow. Not a performance, just a moment between a man and the woman who had loved him into strength. People watched, not with pity, but with awe. In that moment, the room learned what love that endures looks like. Later, as toasts resumed and glasses clinked again, the bride took the mic. Her voice was shaky but clear. She looked out across the crowd, then turned to Miriam. "I need to say something," she said. "Tonight was meant to be about love, about joining two families. And I realize now I almost let my own family ruin that." She took a breath. "This woman is my family, and she's the reason I get to stand beside the man I love today. Without her, there would be no us. The applause that followed was not loud, it was lasting. People stood, not everyone, but enough. Miriam nodded graciously, acknowledging the gesture without needing to own the room. Her strength had never been about commanding attention. It had always been about showing up anyway. In the weeks that followed, Miriam didn't retreat into her quiet world. She created something new. Silver Shoulders, a mentorship initiative for women of color raising children alone, built on the belief that resilience should be recognized and nurtured, not taken for granted. The program offered education support, emotional guidance, and financial literacy workshops for grandmothers, single mothers, and caretakers who had, for too long, carried generations on their backs without recognition. The wedding photo album, once filled with curated perfection, now bore one final, unfiltered image, a new family photo, captured not by a professional photographer but by a guest with a steady hand. Miriam stood at the center, arms wrapped around Ethan and the bride, with bridesmaids, cousins, and new connections gathered close. No one needed to tell her to smile. She did it naturally. This time, no one cropped her out. And though the chandeliers still sparkled above and the marble still gleamed underfoot, it wasn't the luxury people remembered. It was Miriam, her stillness, her grace, her refusal to shrink. Because respect isn't handed out with invitations. It's earned through presence, and Miriam had more presence than anyone in that hall. The music resumed, soft and elegant, drifting through the ballroom like nothing had changed, but something had. It wasn't in the lighting or the decor, it was in the air, in the posture of the people now glancing toward the woman who had once been invisible in plain sight. Miriam stood a little taller, not because she had raised her voice or demanded attention, but because space had finally been made for her. She hadn't come to be honored. She didn't need the spotlight. She was the foundation, the quiet truth beneath every speech, the strength behind every vow. They had tried to dismiss her as background, but they forgot. Pillars don't move. They hold everything up. Have you ever seen someone overlooked, not because of what they lacked, but because of who they were? Sometimes justice doesn't come through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in pearls and silence that stands its ground. If this story spoke to something inside you, share it with someone who knows what it feels like to walk through a room and not be seen. And don't forget to subscribe, because dignity, real, enduring dignity, always deserves a standing ovation. Until next time, walk with grace, even when the room wasn't built for you.